Welcome back to the Advancing Man Project podcast show. My name's Dave Whitley, and I am extremely delighted today. I'm talking to my friend, my brother from a frozen mother.
That's right.
Jesse Coomer. Jesse and I go way back, almost 10 years now. We met in 2016 in California at a Wim Hof method weekend retreat. Subsequently that year, we went through the first Wim Hof method instructor training in the United States up in Colorado. I have climbed mountains with this man nearly naked.
We have climbed mountains, chest bare, in the cold.
Yeah. And Jesse, when I met you, you were a full-time English professor.
Yep.
And right. Teaching at the college level. We've done multiple workshops together, teaching breath work, cold exposure, all of that sort of stuff. Recently, in the past couple of years, Jesse has stepped out of the college English educator scene and stepped full-time into the breathwork educator scene and is doing some phenomenal stuff. Most recently, he's been doing some stuff that you've been doing some stuff that's really caught my attention about the breath as a language, specifically as a language. Oh, look at that. It's like there's a book written called The Language of Breath.
There's a book that was published about it. Yeah, Language of Breath.
And I'll be honest, I have not read that entire book, but I have consumed the Language of Breath online course, and it's phenomenal. It's very practical, hands-on, week to week. Do this. Next week, you'll do the thing. Remember that thing you did last week? This builds off that. It's very methodical, put together very well from someone who, and I think this is a strength of yours, that if we look at somebody like Wim, he did what he did and then tried to systemize it into an educational process. You understood the educational process before you had this current information. And so you know how to create family-sized portions and bite-sized chunks that people can consume and then make use of, rather than it be just, a stream of conscious thing. So lots of fun stuff to talk about. Jesse's a musician, a hobbyist, much like myself. Breath work, cold work. He's a dad. And so we've got a lot of stuff we can talk about on here. And Jesse, thanks a bunch for doing this.
I'm really always excited to talk to Dave Whitley. So you just invite me anytime I'm here.
Jumping into this, some of this, this is really where I wanted to start out with you. And this could wind up taking up the whole deal here too. You and I have talked privately about all of the stuff that we're into, parenting, music, breath work, meditation, cold stuff. I want to have a conversation with you that's familiar but fresh. And recently, in various forms of social media and in culture in general, there's been a lot of uncertainty of what words mean and uncertainty of what defines people, and a lot, and that uncertainty comes from not understanding. So what I want to open this conversation with is a subject that, if it's approached the wrong way, can be very taboo, but if it's approached the right way, the way that we're going to do it, I think that it's vital and important, and it's being overlooked. And that is the subject of masculinity.
Sure. Yeah.
You and I together have done some things that are at the same time to the outside, to the onlooker, might be looked upon as extreme hardcore, and also foofy woo-woo bullshit.
Yeah.
All in the same action, right?
That's life. Yeah.
so embracing that dichotomy is where I want to go with this. Let's talk about masculinity. And we both have sons. You have two kids. You have a son and a daughter, right?
Actually, I just have a son. Yeah. So I was fostering. So my wife and I, we did foster care, and we fostered two little girls for about a year, and they had to go back. But then, actually for about a week, we had three kids.
Okay.
But so then my son came along, and we fostered him and adopted him.
Okay.
So we have he's 8 years old. His name is Malachi, and he's a trip. He loves dad jokes almost as much as I do. So danger.
Yeah.
Friend.
I apologize for my misunderstanding. I got the fostering and the adoption thing mixed up.
Oh yeah. It's confusing.
Anyway, to that point, we both have sons under 10, and we both realize that if we want our sons to grow into manhood and be healthy, productive, well-adjusted adults who are doing good things in the world, that starts with us. We got to be that guy first and model that, because they're going to do what we model. And as everyone who actually has children knows, even if they won't admit it, do as I say, not as I do, does not, has not, and never will work.
Doesn't work.
So there has to be other strategies involved with that. And if we're going to expect a boy to grow into a man, we have to exhibit masculinity. And very often that word gets thrown out, and we think of someone who is old school, hard-jawed, strong, silent type. And as a dad, he's the absent provider. I go to work. Like, I think about the Denzel Washington character in Fences, which was a play that was adapted into a movie. And all that doesn't matter. He's grown. He's having a conversation with his son, who is like a teen, kind of in his coming of age. And the son asks him legitimately, "Why don't you like me?" or "Why did you never like me?" And he was just stunned by this question. This character was, and he says, "Like you? I ain't gotta like you. I've never had to like you. My job is to provide for you and put I'm paraphrasing all this, obviously.
Yeah, sure,
Like he points out this martyrdom of masculinity, or this martyrdom of manhood, about how I sacrificed my life for you, and you're ingrateful because you come to me and ask me why I don't like you. And I'm like, okay, that's where we get the ideas of like toxic masculinity. And I've been back and forth myself on it. Is toxic masculinity actually a thing, or are people just being dickheads?
See, yeah, that's where so anytime you hear about someone who's being masculine, right, in a toxic way, you're like, okay, so what'd they do, right?
Right.
And if a woman would have done that, I would say, well, that's also an asshole. I mean, that person is being toxic and saying I don't care if it's a man or a woman doing it. These things that are considered to be toxic masculinity generally are just being an awful person. And sadly enough, we oftentimes will attribute things to your masculinity or your femininity. That's just like, we don't. So we naturally always want to try to explain something. We feel like we need an explanation for it. And it's like, well, I tell you what it was, and it's like, oh my God, how I you can tell me why it happened, but really the important thing is like what actually happened. Right. So if the person is doing something that's inappropriate, or something that's illegal, or is just awful, let's just focus on that. Let's not like bring, okay, you know what? You're also toxic beard ulinity, or toxic high heels ulinity. It's like, okay, it's the thing, right? I feel like if you focus on the actual behavior, as opposed to saying, oh, you know why you did it? It's because you're a man. You might actually make a little progress. You might actually get people to behave better, as opposed to now I've got to defend not only this action, which hopefully a person could say, okay, yeah, that was wrong, but now I've got to defend my identity, right? Who I am as a man. And so, and then you get everybody, their feathers get ruffled, because now it's like, well, not all men and not all women. And it's like, oh God.
Right.
It's like a Facebook argument.
Yeah. It's what I lovingly refer to as playing chess with a pigeon.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I love that. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's very masturbatory in the sense that it feels good in the moment, but when you're finished, you're like, I didn't get anything done.
Yeah.
I accomplished nothing in this argument.
Well, and human beings, this is the thing about human beings. Like we often don't realize that we are territorial creatures, right? So just like any other creature in nature, like just like my dog over here, who is a fantastic animal, right? We're territorial, and that is something was like, well, wait a minute, I feel like I'm that territorial. Well, we also call this the ego, right? So this is the thing where we're territorial when it comes to our identity, to our, well, I don't feel like you respected me, and so every aspect of our ego, which is not necessarily a bad thing, a lot of times people oversimplify the ego as this, like, this is the bad, you don't want that ego, get that out of there. No, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the thing where it's like we can unconsciously say and do terrible things, and it's because the unconscious version of ourselves, our unconscious processes are trying to protect our territory, right? And those are arguments that tend to lead to bad outcomes,
right?
And and they tend to have no real foundation in rational thought, because it's all preceding our conscious rational thinking, and it's just all emotional and reactionary, as opposed to anything productive at all.
Definitely. The place that I am right now in this evolving idea of it, and I reserve the right to come back 5 years from now or next week and look at this and say, nope, I missed the mark on that one. What are you about to say?
I want to highlight that just for a second, because that's something we should all be willing to do. That's a sign of strength. And so to be able to say, this is where I am now, and I want you to say what you're going to say, but it's important for us all to say, so often when we make a comment, we feel like we're locked in it forever.
Right.
We're doing our best. We're just trying to figure this stuff out. So anyway, I'm sorry. I really respect anybody who's willing to say, hey, this is where I am now. It might be somewhere else later. Right.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that. And this is where I am now, for sure.
Yeah.
And 5 years or 2 days from now, I may be in a completely different place. And that could be diametrically opposed, or it could be 7 miles deeper into what I'm stating now. And I'll, that's just,
who knows?
And really, I think that the only reason that something like that wouldn't happen is if I stop paying attention to a subject. Right.
Yeah. We get complacent. We don't want to think about it anymore.
And that's fine too. Like,
Sure.
I am not a better guitar player now than I was 10 or 20 years ago. But I haven't practiced that much either, like I did, 30 years ago.
Yeah. I plateaued about 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah. But where I am right now is the idea that masculinity, femininity, and something you said earlier about the ego. Oh, the ego is bad. Like I actually jotted this note down to ponder if the ego fits into this or the idea of ego fits into this category as well. And I'm not saying it does or doesn't. I'm saying I need to think on that one. Is toxic or non-toxic? It's energy, right? And is electricity toxic? Well, it depends on whether you're using it to cook your food or whether you are being struck by lightning, right? It's all circumstantial. So like if I use electricity, well, and that's not even the best way to say it. Like, am I using it to cook my food, or am I using it to fire up an electric chair on an innocent person?
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just energy, just like money is energy. I can use money to do good things. I can use money to screw people over. Sure. Right. Yeah. So is toxic masculinity a thing? I think a more precise way to address that is, can masculinity be used in a toxic way? And I believe the answer to that is yes. And I believe the same is true of femininity as well, or feminine energy, right? So there's a lot of conversation floating around about masculinity, toxic masculinity, whatever. It's like, let's define masculinity, right? It's an energy. Yeah. It's an energy. And if I define it as one thing, you define it as something else, and we argue over it, it's the proverbial apples and oranges, right? When really if we're going to argue over apples and oranges, what we really need to argue over is fiber and glucose. What do they have in common? Right?
Yeah.
Right. So arguing over the differences never yields as good a result in my experience as acknowledging the similarities. So the similarities, if masculinity is an energy and it's a going forward, penetrative, problem solving, assertive type of energy, right? Now, what's the difference between assertive and aggressive?
Yeah.
So assertive would be positive masculinity, and aggressive, causing harm to someone, would be a negative aspect of that. I want to hear what your thoughts are on that, because like I said, this is a fresh conversation. We've not talked about this subject before, and
I'm just loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. So I think so often the conversation goes to capabilities, which is unproductive, right? Well, a man can do this, but a woman can do that. And this is what a man thinks about, and this is what a woman thinks. I mean, I do think about the Roman Empire. Ever since I found out about it, I've been thinking about that damn Roman Empire for so long. It's awesome. No, but one of the things I've observed, and hey, we're just throwing stuff out here, but one of the things I think I've observed, rather than talking about capabilities or what they're more like, a person's more, likely to enjoy, men like sports and cars and women like this and that. I often look at, I like your analogy to energy. I look at sometimes patterns of behavior. And one of the things I've noticed is kind of like, so generally masculinity seems to be a very direct point A to point B type of a pattern. So it's like, this thing needs to get done, I'm going directly that direction. And it's extreme focus in on one aspect, right? So we're focused in, this is the thing. And whereas feminine energy, a feminine pattern would typically be, not a straight line. It would maybe be a curvy line. And okay, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to go this way. And then I'm going over here, and I'm going over here. And then I'm going to go over here. And then eventually, we're going to make our way over to this thing. And so I think this is why it's so helpful. We both have been married now for a while. And I think this is where I see so much value in my wife's perspective, because there's a lot of things that, because I'm so focused on, okay, this is the goal, I'm going directly toward that goal, and I'm putting all my energy in this singular direction. I find a lot of value in her. It almost seems like, instead of singular direction, it's like, okay, I'm going this way and I'm going that way. I'm kind of, there's like, it's, instead of a straight line, it's a curvy line. And then of course, obviously, because these patterns are not the same, we get frustrated with each other, and and we always, there's a lot of conflict, and I think that's another part of marriage and relationships, masculine and feminine as well. But both are really helpful and important. Now, there are times whenever I'm going to want a person who's going to get, straight to it. There's a time whenever I think maybe it's more important to have a pattern that might be more meandering. It's interesting in investments, time and time again, portfolio investor, people who manage portfolios tend to, the people who tend to do the best are female. And what is typically, for the longest time, it was a male dominated profession. And they've shown that it's generally that you'll see that men will take greater risks. And is that a big surprise? Well, okay, maybe not. It's not a big surprise. But a lot of times I see these different patterns, and then of course that's when the conversation, someone will say, well, it's not always this way, it's not always that way. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but that's, in my lifetime, that's generally the biggest thing. And then you can extrapolate from there. As far as, so this is why, if you have a person with a pattern who's direct and straightforward, you're going to go over to his house, and it might be really bare bones. There's a couch, there's a TV, and there's a refrigerator, and that's how men live, and it's disgusting or whatever, and then you might go, I feel like from those patterns, you get everything else that we associate with the sexes. And obviously, there's variation within that. But typically that's what I've seen. And again, I'll go so far as to say that, who knows, maybe I'm totally wrong, but that's so far how I've seen it.
Everything you said is making sense, and I agree with you on that. So obviously you're brilliant. I agree with everything you said.
It's genius, right?
It is. But as I'm thinking in dad mode, and I'm looking at my son as he's growing up, and this is kind of where this is gonna, like I'm laying out some pieces right here, and I'm gonna see how these pieces fit together in this conversation. the old school stern children should be seen and not heard, I'm the daddy and I said so approach that has been prevalent for so long, is, in my experience and my observation, thankfully, if not, it's not dead, but it's definitely wounded and it's dragging its feet. And there's a whole lot of stuff in there that could be a toxic expression of masculinity as a dad. And I believe that, like almost every problem you can come up with, it's rooted in ignorance somewhere. This is how we've always done it. And then one day someone will say, just because we've always done it, does that mean it's the best way to do it?
Right. Right.
And then things evolve from there. But one of the things that I have recently come to experience with my son, who just turned 5, and as he is figuring out how to navigate his own emotional landscape.
Yeah.
And I grew up in my parents weren't this way necessarily, but I grew up in the era of children be seen and not heard, you know, and what I see now with that approach is that what winds up happening is when the child is doing what the parent wants them to do, and I hesitate to use the phrase, even though this is what that parent would do, when the child is being good, which means you're doing what I want you to do, and you're not disrupting my life or making my life inconvenient. Then they get little or no attention, little praise from the parent. But then they do something where they're, quote, being bad. Now the parent steps in and does whatever corrective thing they're going to do. What that actually reinforces developmentally, in my understanding of it, is that, oh, mom and dad will pay attention to me when I start fucking up.
Yeah.
And it's not a deliberate thing, but it's like when I act this way, or when I'm in this energetic state, really is what I believe, then I get the attention that I'm craving. And if I'm not getting it, then all I got to do is to do this thing, right? So taking that idea and making sure that when my son is doing something, that I'm recognizing what he's doing, finding the good in what he does, even if it's not something that would necessarily be desirable. That's part of helping him figure it out, because that whole sit down and be quiet thing is a suppression of emotion, suppression of energy, ultimately a suppression of, like, self-worth. And so helping him get through that is forcing me to look at my own perception and my own way of handling my emotions, right? And I can't model or teach him how to regulate an emotion that I'm not willing to experience myself. And if it's and so there's that thing of like, oh, this kid is acting this way, I'm going to shut this down.
Yeah.
There's a lot of evidence that supports I'm shutting that down because I'm uncomfortable with this and I don't know how to deal with it because I wasn't allowed to express it. And so I'm in my own path, going back and checking all that out myself. And what that leads me to is this one word that I want to throw out that, to the average person, they would think it's the opposite or in the opposite category of masculinity, and that is vulnerability. But in my awareness right now today, like we talked about earlier, and this could change, but I don't think it will, one of the most masculine and powerful things that a man can do is be vulnerable. Because if I'm confident, I can be vulnerable and not be harmed, right? It'll be uncomfortable, but I know that I'll still walk away okay with it. And being vulnerable with myself and expressing and modeling vulnerability for my son, in front of my son, with my son, telling him, I understand how you're feeling right now. I felt that way before. When this happens to me, I do the same kind of thing and I feel the same kind of thing. So that's a very long, drawn out way for me to circle back around and talk to you about or have you talk to me rather about the interrelationship between masculinity and vulnerability, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love what you said there. And now when it comes to vulnerability, we have to understand the concept of being vulnerable is that you're capable of receiving harm. You're in a position where you're not guarded and you may or may not be safe. And so in our space, I think we talk about when it comes to health and wellness, when it comes to coaching, we talk about the value of being vulnerable. But I think it's important to understand that that vulnerability, if you aren't actually safe, okay, so if you're vulnerable and you're not safe, that leads to trauma, right? So the classic, whenever you're a child and there's an abuser, you are vulnerable. You are not strong enough to stand up for yourself, and you're vulnerable without safety. And the sad thing is, it may lead to trauma in your own self, right? It may lead to, if you're vulnerable, you may get killed, maimed. You're not good to anyone because, well, I'm sorry, you were vulnerable. You're not strong enough to help save your friends or stand up to people, right? So there's a certain degree of vulnerability that, we look at and we say, okay, we don't want to be absolutely vulnerable in every degree. And the only reason I'm unpacking that is because I think sometimes in our space, we extol vulnerability, and we don't really, we need to unpack it a little bit. So complete vulnerability is something that as a man, we don't want to have to be completely vulnerable. There's a reason why, when it comes to some of the more, I guess you might consider it, traditional concepts of masculinity, there's the protector, there's the person who, for instance, when shit hits the fan, I don't want a bunch of vulnerable emergency services. I'm at that point, I'm vulnerable. I need someone to be strong and guarded and protected, so that I can be safe and vulnerable at the same time. And that's where I think the secret sauce is, when you can be vulnerable and safe. And I think that's what you're getting at. And it's this combination of being strong enough to be vulnerable that is at the essence of masculinity, in my view, because you've done the work to strengthen yourself. And what do you have to do to get stronger? You have to face your weaknesses, right? Whether you're dealing with physical strength or psychological strength, you've done the work to become strong enough that now I can let my guard down because I'm strong enough to do that. And I'm confident enough in myself, maybe in the environment that I find myself in. This is why retreats and workshops and things are so valuable. But I'm able to say, I'm scared, right? And so I have a son. We both have sons, and this is, I think, is insanely important for our sons, and for all fathers, really, to say, there's some things I just don't know. And there's some things I'm worried about, and I'm scared about this thing. Now, they need to know that they're not vulnerable to the point where they don't have a protector, though. So you need to say, we're going to get through this, right? And this is I think the essence of confidence, in that you're not necessarily confident in the skill. You're or like, I'm the strongest person in the world, or I can, I can do the thing. But I am confident that we're going to figure it out. And I think this is something that, if you've lived long enough and you've tried hard enough, that you've been through a few things, right? You've been through a few things, and you can say, well, I figured it out then. I made it through. I'm still alive, and I can figure this out as well. So you have that confidence, and that combination of safety and vulnerability is whenever you can actually have healing. You can have growth, and you can show your young son or daughter, you can show your children that, listen, first of all, and this is something that I think everybody just assumes that whenever they become a grown up, suddenly, they're Superman. When you're a kid, you just, what I'm saying? And then I don't know when that's ever going to happen.
Right.
There's all of the questions are just more cosmic and impossible to completely answer. And so building that ability early and saying, listen, I don't know the answer to these questions. No one really knows these answers, But here's the thing. We can be honest. And that's really what this kind of vulnerability is,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just the ability to be honest, which takes a lot of strength. And you don't want to conflate. I think it's important that we show our sons that we have to build strength in order to be able to be vulnerable and have that safety as well. So it's an incredibly masculine thing to do. And I'm just going on and on a little bit, but one of the things though that I think, sadly enough, there's the pendulum always swings,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll find that you have on the other side a person who is praised for being vulnerable. Sometimes we just praise men for being vulnerable without this caveat of, listen,
Right.
you need to have the strength to be vulnerable. You need to be doing the work. It's not just, hey, cry a lot and then we're going to applaud. And I think a lot of times, especially, I don't know, in my lifetime, this kind of messed me up when I was a kid, to be honest. But like, there's this whole thing where you're supposed to be incredibly emotionally fragile, and that's what vulnerability is. Or you're supposed to cry all the time because we're supposed to, it's okay to cry, but again, it's the same thing. It's okay. It's good to be vulnerable, but you have to have an understanding of what the best way to make that happen for positive results. Because simply becoming vulnerable, I mean, you go down to some kind of I don't know, a very dangerous neighborhood or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Take off all your clothes and go to sleep. You're incredibly vulnerable, right? But nothing's good going to come out of that situation, as opposed to doing the work and building the strength and the self-confidence to say, I can be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I think ultimately being vulnerability is a function of being vulnerable, rather, is a function of being honest and being honest with the self, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's one of those things that an experience that I've had multiple times is how totally vulnerable it feels and how absolutely powerful it feels at the same time to be in an ice bath, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
to be
Absolutely.
or to be on top of the mountain that we were on in Colorado and knowing, okay, we got up here, we're halfway done. This is the halfway point.
Yeah. Yeah. We still have to go down. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we still have to go, not just go back down, but then get in the vehicle and drive back to the lodge, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's one of those things that uh, you said this earlier too, that like our human nature wants to separate and divide and identify the one point, and the fact is that just doesn't exist. That is our conscious mind's way of trying to relate to and in some way understand the overwhelming totality that everything around us is just one thing, right? And so being vulnerable, being strong enough to be vulnerable is something that we can do. We cannot be vulnerable enough to be strong unless we first embrace our strength, right? Did that make
Wow. I
sense?
like that. I like that. There has to be a time, and this is, I think this is where all growth happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you are you're putting yourself outside of your comfort zone. And if you haven't already shared with your audience the Dave Whitley circles of comfort zone,
Mm.
and the danger zone and all these things,
Mm-hmm.
that was really eye-opening. And this is, again, one of the benefits of knowing Dave for so long. That really was just a really clear lesson on how those things worked. But ultimately, you have to have, there's this combination of humility, right? And willingness to fail, willingness to try. And all of that has to do with honesty. And all of it has to do with I would, and this is one of those things where I would rather just be incredibly honest then we also lie to ourselves a lot, and we don't necessarily lie to ourselves. We bullshit ourselves. We deceive ourselves. And it can, the whole fake it till you make it. You can occasionally get by with that.
You got to remember to make it at some point, though.
That's the thing. You have to do the growth, or you're just faking it, and then eventually you're never actually going to see the growth, and then at that point, and that's where I think this is where the concept of masculinity it's been skewed, right? Because there's this hollow shell of what a man is, and it's these attributes that it's so funny. The stereotypical, if you ask most people what happens when you get more testosterone, right, the male hormone, it's that you get grumpy and horny, right? And the reality is, research shows that's not really the truth. Yes, higher levels of testosterone can help to improve your libido, but they've shown that whatever your personality already was, it's just going to be more of that.
Right.
But somehow, the more man juice you have, right, the more man hormone you have. Why do we always think you're just going to be a terror? You're going to be an asshole to everybody, and it's sad because there's a lot of hollow shell understandings of a very complex thing.
I think to that point, there is this stereotype that exists in our mind, and all stereotypes are rooted in truth at some point, right? That a masculine man is there's the I'm having so many thoughts in my mind right now, and they're all trying to come out of my mouth. You've heard about me talking about being a kid that stuttered before. This is where that comes from.
That's where it comes from. Well, I'll just as you're formulating, I don't know, I'll just add to the point that, again, you made the point that stereotypes often root themselves in some kind of fact. If you think about when it comes to toxic masculinity and when it comes to concepts of what a man is all about, you have a part of our species so that the prefrontal cortex develops much later for men, and we also have incredibly very, very strong emotions. So the concept, the stereotype is that women have stronger emotions than men do, but the reality is actually men feel things very, very strongly, and then we don't have the prefrontal cortex until much later on in life, almost 30. So usually it's between 25 and 28. But I think for me, it was definitely the 28.9, but like so what do you see? You see an enormous amount of very aggressive or whatever. You see emotional behavior without a filter oftentimes.
Right.
And it's not maleness. It's just part of, okay. And you start to see, oh, well, men do this, and that must be masculinity. Well, no. Okay. So, so we have certain things that, okay, younger men are more likely to get into fights, right? They're more likely to have extreme behavior, and there are elements of our biology that might lend themselves to that. But that is putting a biology on it and then just attributing that to what it is to be masculine, and then therefore the rest of your life, no matter if you're your son's age or or my dad turned 75 not too long ago, then that's what it is to be masculine. And again, it's an oversimplification of something that's really much more complex.
Yeah. I think like the thought I was having earlier.
Yeah.
I think that it comes down to there's a decided difference, I believe, between masculinity and manhood. And I think this blurred line that happens there, if we go back to looking at where the stereotypes come from, if we go back to hunter-gatherer days, we go back to warrior days,
sure,
right? You could have someone who was very physically dominating and very emotionally immature or very emotionally stunted, who can come and impose his will over someone else and declare, I am not only a man, I am the man. And anyone who disagrees with that, I will slaughter you.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't have to grow up. Right. And I know that's like,
no, I hear
I'm painting with really broad strokes there. And like you said, it is a much more nuanced and complex subject than that. But I think that sort of permeates the ideas, right. And of our culture. You know, we this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's applicable too. I've heard all my life about eating disorders, and it's usually associated with girls, young girls, women, that sort of stuff, body dysmorphia, all that sort of stuff. But if you go back and then of course, like Barbie dolls, creating this unrealistic sense of beauty that was, you know, proportions and all that. And yeah, I can totally see how that plays out. By the way, the toys that I played with when I was a kid were He-Man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't get talked about. Right.
I used to live. So Derek Lunsford just won the Mr. Olympia, and he was a former student of mine, actually. And we lifted weights at the university gym together. And he's a really good guy, very good guy.
He won the overall, the big man title, right?
That's right. This year,
I'm gonna let you finish your story, but which is interesting to me that very few people know who have won the Olympia for the past few years in that category, but everybody knows C-Bum, right? Because
it's funny, yeah.
In the what do they call it, the classic physique?
Classic physique, yeah. He's
because he looks like Arnold. But
he looks great. Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, yeah, I follow random sports. Like I'll watch sumo wrestling and bodybuilding, and then I don't know who's playing for the Bulls. But anyway, but you know, there is certainly we oftentimes we and again, this comes back to territorialism. Oftentimes we will make it feel like, okay, so it's so bad in one direction, and we're all doing our best, right? And we all have certain core needs, and a lot of these things are based in, I want to be seen a certain way, I want to identify a certain way, and hey, if I want to look a certain way, or and some of these things are just like, well, in general, for instance, in general, if you are a big, strong, beefy man, fewer people are going to mess with you. Again, you're strong enough to be vulnerable at that point to some degree, right? So there's some of these things that are just utility, but we tend to have a hard time seeing past our grievances, I think is where you're going with that. And I completely agree. And we often will impose those things on each other more than anyone else. The classic concept of a guy going to the gym, I think all guys that have ever started going to the gym, especially if you started young, which I did not. I didn't start until after I was married. So I didn't have this concept, but most men go to the gym expecting, because I'm lifting weights, I'm going to get a lot of women. And they're going to talk about how great my physique is and stuff like that, right? And then what it turns out to be is just the bros are like, man, those pecs are getting huge, man. Look at those glutes, dude. Those calves, you know. And it's this funny thing where, or we'll, like the classic thing, we would always tease Derek Lunsford because his calves, man, those calves are, we still do, man, really look good on the Olympia stage. I mean, we're talking about the guy who scored that, you know, really, you know, he's literally is Mr. Olympia. Like,
he's the best in the world at what he does right now. Yeah,
exactly. Best physique by the judges and all this stuff. And all those calves, you got to work on. I mean, we'll tease each other about that, right? And so oftentimes we have all these grievances, and then we are the ones who are enforcing the things. So because I will tell you this, and ladies, if you're listening, us guys, we don't actually talk about a lot of the things that you worry about the most. A lot of things you worry about the most. We actually don't talk about them. It's not even a thing where a lot of those things we don't talk about the most. And the funny thing is, so many times, I don't know how many times, I'm sure men who are listening to this, you're like, why do you even put on makeup? You don't have to put on the makeup. You look fine, right? Well, yeah, you think so, but so-and-so at the ladies at the office and all this stuff, So oftentimes we cannibalize ourselves, and we have all these grievances. It's like, man, the patriarchy's getting me down, or man, I've got it so hard as a man. And oftentimes it is our own, I guess, people who would share those same burdens. And it's this concept of, what is it, the panopticon, where it's a prison that everyone watches each other, and so no one can escape because everyone's watching each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this self-perpetuating thing where I hear you, man. I want to be like Arnold still. I'm 43.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take roids, but man, whenever I lift weights, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing what Arnold did.
Yeah. And I think that it's an important point that you bring up. I think that so often we get caught up in thinking, I have to do this because of what they will think and what they will say. And the fact is, they're not even paying attention because they're too busy saying, I have to do this because of what they will say. And so if I'm concerned about what Jesse's going to say, and Jesse's concerned about what I'm going to say, and neither one of us are paying attention to what the other one's doing, that in the realm of the thing that we're concerned about, it's a lot of mental bandwidth gets eaten up there, right? And it's this societal thing. And when we bring that back around to the idea of being vulnerable, like, oh, if I'm too vulnerable, Jesse's going to think I'm a sissy, right?
Yep, that's it.
Jesse's, and the fact is, if I'm doing something that's uncomfortable and vulnerable like that, Jesse most likely will be sitting back there going, glad that's not me.
And this is where I think it's so commendable when you really do the work, and you can be vulnerable. That means you can be honest,
mm-hmm.
right? And so oftentimes people say, well, I can't be honest until I'm rich enough, or until I'm strong enough, or until I have this, or it's always a later on type of a thing, which is basically, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have internal drives that will it will change the way we behave unless we really consciously are aware of it. It'll change the way we behave because our species is a social species.
Mm-hmm.
To be ostracized from the group is not only death, but it's a painful death. It's the worst
mm-hmm.
kind of death, right? So for our hunter-gatherer, ancestors, for the longest, amount of human history, that was, to be ostracized is the worst.
Right.
And so we're this interesting combination of a species that is very very territorial, and at the same time we have a hard time being honest with each other because, and this is vulnerable, right? We have a hard time being vulnerable with each other because we don't want to be ostracized. And This is why men have a hard time sharing their emotions, but also why women have a hard time sharing their emotions as well.
Yeah. One of the things that's been helpful for me
mm-hmm.
in walking this path and figuring this out myself is the breath work and meditation that I do. It's the cold exposure stuff that I do, right? Because that is, yes, we're social creatures. But breathing, meditating, putting yourself in the cold, that's an individual experience, and it cannot be done any other way. Even if you're in a group of people at a workshop like we've done so many times before,
mm-hmm.
and it's someone they've never gotten in the ice bath before, and it's their first time, and they got the entire group there supporting them. There's a strength / vulnerability that when that first foot goes into the ice tub, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive this? Right. And all of everything around gets shut out, and it becomes this expression of, it's just me. It's me.
Yeah.
And that is being strong enough to be vulnerable in a lot of ways, I think. So
that's exactly what that is.
So there's societal misconceptions about vulnerability, and I believe, as we've talked about, that affects men's health. Like if I don't want Jesse to think I'm a sissy because I won't get in the ice bath,
Mm-hmm. Right.
How in your experience and in your teaching and working with clients and stuff, how can things like breath work, meditation, to a lesser degree ice bath, but also ice baths? I know that a lot of the work that you're doing now has to do with integrating conscious and subconscious and unifying, integrating. How can meditation, and I'll lump all of that under the category of meditation, right?
Yeah.
How can practices like that empower men to redefine masculinity on your own terms?
I think one of the things that I'm learning, and that it's one of those things I'm continuing to learn, I should say. And it's taken many years, lots of clients, lots of experimentation, research on my own, to understand that much of our behaviors are based off of patterns that we've established that, for better or worse, a part of us. So our unconscious self. So that's your subconscious, but it's also all of the other things you don't have conscious access to. So, I mean, we're talking about more than just the thoughts that are just below conscious.
So I want to interrupt you just so that I'm clear.
Yeah.
You're making a distinction between what we would call subconscious and unconscious here, right?
So subconscious would be part of the unconscious.
Like, okay, got it.
It's so, and this is, and it gets confusing because people have defined this different ways over history, right? So, but basically, I'm just making the distinction. You have conscious access, you have unconscious access. Now, you have to understand that the unconscious. So this is all of your processes, all of your thought process, all of the tendencies, the patterns, the beliefs that you have, all of those things about yourself, about the world around you, about how to react, and both psychologically and physiologically. They're based off of all the experiences that you've had, all of the input that you've had, all of the beliefs that you have. And that is influenced by society. That's influenced by your experiences, the dad that was said, be quiet and shut up, all of these things. And they're going to have a major impact on you the rest of your life. And hopefully you had a great dad and you can model things, but no human is perfect.
Correct.
And society constantly changes. And so I know that I had a lot of misconceptions as to what my masculinity was all about. And I had a lot of misconceptions as to how to express that. And so it's important to say, well, we can consciously think about these things, and then we have to start to put them into practice. Now, when you start to make changes and to processes that your unconscious believes are part of your identity, your territory, and your survival strategy, it's going to fight you. It's going to fight you every bit of the way.
A change in identity is literally a threat to existence, right?
It is.
Or it's perceived that way. I mean,
it is a threat to, and we have what is, some people refer to like a neurological or an unconscious, or there's a few different ways people describe it, but an immune system for it. And so a threat to your identity starts to actually, there's parts of your brain that will start to shut down in an effort to protect you from having to think these new thoughts. We don't want those things unconsciously, but in order to improve, in order to change and make a better life for ourselves, and to step into positive aspects of who we are as men, we have to think, okay, this is something I need to do. So understanding how that process manifests itself is important. So what I do is I teach people to learn what I call the language of breath, but it's not just breathing techniques. It's learning the unconscious signals that you're going to experience, and we don't generally identify, we don't understand what they are. So for instance, a lot of times I'll use this example. If you drink coffee in the morning, you understand where the energy is coming from, and you might look forward to it. You're like, hey, I like this caffeine, and it's great. But if you experience that energy boost and you had no idea where it's coming from, then it kind of freaks you out. That's literally the stress response, right?
Yeah.
That's literally what most people experience. Like, oh my God, something's wrong with me. Oh my God, it's terrible. So once you start to understand this is what you are.
I never thought about that before. That, like, if I was just sitting around one morning and then all of a sudden felt the same as I did after I drank coffee,
it would be crazy feeling. Yeah. It's like getting, I mean, it's a much lower on the scale, but the classic, someone put, spike the punch or put LSD in your whatever. And it's like, well, it's way down there on the scale, but it's still, it freaks us out. And that's literally what happens. You experience energy that you don't know why it's there. So it's there because your unconscious is trying to move you towards some kind of action, and it's trying to give you the energy that it thinks you need to take that action, because that is the human organism. That is what we are completely built for, is taking action. That's, for the vast majority of human history, that's how all problems were solved. You ran away, you ran toward it, you rested, you did things. So what happened, the way we reclaim our masculinity and the way we become better men is, first of all, understanding what we are. And that is saying, okay, I am a human being that has unconscious processes that are trying to help me to survive and thrive. These processes I'm going to have certain sensations and physiological changes that correspond with what my unconscious believes is the situation. And it might be, for instance, if you get, this is the classic thing. We all know the guy that no matter what he does, he gets with the woman who's going to cheat on him, right? Or we know these things. Or it's the guy that's incredibly nice guy. He's really a good person, but can't hold down a job because of his behaviors, right? And so we have to understand, we have to make a change in these behaviors. And in order to do that, we have to become vulnerable enough to make change, and we have to feel safe. And the only way we're going to feel safe in instances, or at least one of the most accessible ways to feel safe in instances where we normally would feel unsafe, is to learn the language of breathing. So I'm going to speak safety into my nervous system, which is going to be a message of safety into these unconscious processes that are trying to inform me, no, you need to run, you need to punch that guy, you need to make an inappropriate, you need to cheat on your wife, right? All these things are the worst aspects of being a man, but there's a reason why those impulses exist. And that means a part of you is trying to advance you, and it's misinformed, right? It's always trying to help you. It's always trying to put you in the best possible situation, but it's not always right. And so oftentimes we'll get the advice, listen to your heart, listen to your gut. Those are both ways of expressing, listen to your unconscious. And it's great whenever you've got enormous amount of positive experiences. You had good role models and things like that. And in that case, all of the patterns that your unconscious sees, it will say, well, the appropriate thing to do here is to tell the truth, or the appropriate thing to do here is to not cheat on my spouse, or to not punch this person who's insulted me. But we don't always have all of those things. And we have to say, hey, listen, it's not my fault that I was born into this kind of situation, or have this kind of experiences, or culture has made me feel this way about how I should respond in this kind of instance. Like in our lifetimes, I mean, a sexual relationship has gone from something that's the sacred bond between a man and a woman, or just two consenting, like a handshake, right? It's just, I'm going to go bang as many women as possible, and all these things where it's just like, okay, that's going to cause you an enormous amount of psychological harm in the long run. You don't know that. And you've been encouraged by society and maybe your friends and maybe even your family to do those things. But in the long run, you're not really going to have much happiness in that. And so what we do with breath work is we learn to help ourselves feel safe enough to make changes in our life. And that is done in multiple forms of breath work, hyperventilative styles of breath work, but also just understanding, I feel this way, my physiology has changed. Maybe it's something as simple as you've got a heart rate monitor and you're like, okay, I know that I'm feeling the stress response right now. How can I speak to my unconscious and say, okay, we're safe, keep going, I'm going to make these changes in my life and do the right things. So it's not as simple as you do a breathing technique and you're cured. It's a matter of repetition and teaching yourself this new way of living, but saying all the way, hey, we're fine, we're okay, because we're more than just white. When we just white knuckle it, it just takes one little thing added, and then now it's too much for my willpower to stand, and now I'm going to punch, and now I'm going to cheat on my wife, and now I'm going to, you know, leave my kids, and all these things that are these negative aspects that I would encourage all men listening to avoid. You know, so ultimately it comes down to learning how to interact with yourself better, form a better inner relationship with yourself, so that you can form a better relationship with the world around you and with the people you want in your life.
And so how does this mindfulness, and for lack of a better term, this awareness that you develop through your approach to breath work, how does that, obviously from what you're describing, we're talking about making positive changes in our mental health.
Yep.
And mental health, that's a very broad stroke thing, right?
Yes, it is.
And
a lot of people say that, you know, those big words.
Yeah. And I think that there's some validity to the idea that men's mental health has been very much overlooked up until recently.
Yep.
And I cannot not see the correlation between a 3-year-old boy being told, stop crying, you're acting like a little girl, or whatever, suppressing emotions that way. And then, you know, 40 years later, he's depressed, he's in the bottle, he's addicted to porn, video games, whatever, he's cheating on his wife because he wasn't given that ability to learn how to express those mental aspects of himself in a healthy way. So what role does this meditation and mindfulness and learning these things as an adult now affect your approach to being a dad?
One is that I want to make sure that I am being the role model. As you said earlier, you know, it's really important that I show that the most masculine thing you can do is master your emotional state, or at least I want my son to understand that he who loses his temper first loses, and that we want to try to remain as positive and as calm and not as reactive as possible. So again, it has more to do with me being the role model that I want to be for my son than it has to do with me teaching him breathing techniques or anything like that. Obviously, my son is he's the only kid that'll say, hey, that guy was breathing through his mouth, Dad. Isn't that weird? And I'm like, yes, I know, son. I know, son. I'm all, you know, so I try to give him some basic breathing tips, but it has more to do with the fact that I know after 43 years, I know, or I think I know, the kind of example that I want to give to him. And I know how I want to give him measured and consistent feedback on his behavior as well. And I don't want to make it so that he doesn't have that safety to be vulnerable, because when a parent is consistent, we have to understand safety is generally predictability, right? If I can predict how my parents are going to behave, I know I'm safe with them. And if I give him that, then I give him the ability to be honest with me. I give myself the ability to be honest with him. And that's how we grow together as father and son.
It's interesting you say that triggered a thought in my mind. I was speaking with a friend who came from a pretty abusive and neglected childhood. His mom was I think bipolar and schizophrenic, and this was a long time ago. So she was not diagnosed nor treated well. Yeah. Not like mistreated, but like she did not get good treatment for her mental illness at the time. And he was the kid in that environment. Yeah. And you know, suffered and lived through all manner of things that would be associated with that. And recently I was talking to him, and he, for whatever reason, I don't remember the circumstances and not really relevant either, went back, and his mom's gone now, but he went back and revisited the home that he lived in for a period of time with her. And as he was walking through, like something tripped in him, and he, like, out of the corner of his eye, his brain turned something into his mom asleep on the bed. And he said that he felt himself go into what he called ninja mode. He started walking silently, And he walked 4 or 5 steps and was like hyper aware of his situation. And he's like, it was the weirdest thing. It was like, I knew that if I woke her up, it would be bad. And she's not there.
Yeah.
And so that's something that he's carried through. And so you say predictability is safety. So yes, there's the predictability of I'm doing everything I can to take care of my son and make his life safe and you know, a place for him to grow and do well. But there's an inherent safety that has to be learned when you're in a dangerous situation like that as a kid, and you're 5, 6 years old and you don't have the tools to deal with it. You learn to create your own safety by doing the sort of thing that he did. You learn skills that a child should not have to know to keep themselves safe and protected from the person who should be there, ideally to provide and protect. So it was just you triggered that thought on me, right?
Yeah, this is such a hard thing for us to grapple with when you're as a human being, because you will have children who grow up in that environment who or worse, who will be put into foster care, and they don't want to be put into foster care. They want to go back. Right. And sometimes we call it the devil, right?
Right.
It's this strange thing where even sadly enough, the predictability that is what we would consider a negative kind of predictability can be, strangely enough, a signal of safety in the strangest way. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around it because it seems so twisted, and it is. But this comes, this is, and he probably is not aware of many of the behaviors that he has still to this day that are predicated on that life.
Well, there's something about familiarity that feels safe, because I think that all of us, a lot of us anyway, talk about we're making changes, or we're going to do these things, and we're going to change, we're going to improve, we're going to grow, we're going to advance, or whatever. But that familiarity that fights against that threat to survival that we were talking about earlier, that's within our subconscious or our unconscious, there's a familiarity that feels safer than the prospect of the unknown of changing, right? And so like all of us who are talking about changing or improving or whatever, there's a certain amount of unrest that comes with that. A certain amount of nervousness or fear, however you want to label it. Like there's a discomfort at the prospect of, I'm admitting there's something about myself that could be better, and I'm going to become this other person, or I'm going to change this part of myself. And that the fear of doing that can sometimes not be worth giving up the familiarity of a terrible situation.
It's so hard for us. There's a condition called Anton syndrome, and it's a condition where a person is blind, but they don't know they're blind. We all have these blind spots. It's probably the most extreme blind spot you can have, is to actually be completely blind and you don't realize that you're blind. We all have these blind spots, and we have all of these things that the unconscious parts of ourselves will do to try to preserve your safety, and some of them just don't make any sense. But what you find is that eventually, if a person wants to make a change, it's also very difficult, because that aspect of those unconscious processes will do everything possible to keep that person safe. And that's where, addictive behaviors, that's where these limiting beliefs, all these things, they're based in a part of you that loves you very much and is always trying to help you, and is like, here you go, buddy, I'm doing my best. And it's keeping you from living the life that you deserve to live. And it's a matter of, eventually sometime we were like, this is not where I need to be. I need to be this is not the direction that I should go. We have these conscious awakening, sometimes we call it, or recognition of, this is not the me that I want to be. I'm not really this way. Or at least I don't want to be this way anymore. And that's when the work starts.
Right.
That's such a powerful such a powerful moment. And of course, sometimes we call it rock bottom moments because you're so vulnerable, right?
Right.
That's where growth starts, is in those moments of vulnerability.
Right.
So yeah. I think when we're as fathers, we want to obviously, there's so much, the job is so complex. It's one word that means so many things, and we can overthink it too. But I think that is just another way to know you're probably doing okay. If you're overthinking it, you're probably doing all right.
Yeah. How's the cliche go that if you're wondering if you're a bad parent, you're not?
You're probably okay. Yeah.
Bad,
I don't know how many times.
Bad parents don't sit around wondering if they're bad parents.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I don't know how many times I've been like, oh, I'm just a total failure. I just, and then, it's like, you got to give yourself some grace, and you have to let yourself learn too. We don't stop growing up until we decide to stop growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's an important thing. So I love what you do with your clients. And this is something that I do with my clients as well, is just saying, okay, we're going to grow now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be some discomfort involved. And that's the only way we grow, is getting outside of the comfort zone.
Well, and I think that we grow up, and then once we've grown up, we are then equipped to grow in.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
I just made that up just now, but
yeah, write that one down, Dave.
Yeah. Well, it's recorded, so that's
good.
There you go. We've talked about some heavy stuff, and I know you got to go here in a minute. So here's where we're going to go into lightning round, rapid fire questions for Jesse. Okay.
Let's hear it.
First thing that comes to mind, say it, and we'll just go from there, and then we'll wrap up. Okay.
Oh, cool.
And when we get done with that, I'll stop recording. We'll talk for a second and then go. Okay.
Sounds
all right.
Good.
What's a useless talent that you have?
I am, oh boy, a useless talent. What is a useless talent I have? I have a lot of them, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know. You've stumped me. A useless talent. You know what a useless talent is? I know all 13 comma rules. I didn't
even know that was a thing, but
yeah, that's pretty. I mean, it's
now I've got to go Google something, right?
Yeah, right.
What is a personal mantra or belief or idea that you want to pass on to your son?
That you are worth working on. Nobody's perfect. You're not perfect just the way you are. That you are absolutely worth working on.
Favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Oh, well, good timing, right?
It's coming right up. Yeah.
Something funny or heartwarming related to your kid that's happened.
Yeah. So the day I met my kid, so I adopted my son, my wife and I did, and he got out of the car and gave me a hug. First thing.
I'm not crying. You're crying.
Yeah. Right.
Most valuable piece of advice you've received as a father?
That if you're overthinking it, you're probably doing just fine. I've received that multiple times from my own father and from other people that I respect.
David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar?
I'm a Van Halen, not Van Hagar kind of guy. So
okay. Roth era, got it.
I know that I'm speaking to a hardcore fan, so I hope that's the right answer.
Oh, I'm an Eddie fan, right?
Okay, all right then it's just a Van Halen fan all the way through.
Yeah. Well, it's two different bands.
I mean, right? What was it? Right Now was a fantastic hit, and
fantastic.
That was Hagar, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. I could handle either one. So.
Yeah. Yeah. If you could only eat one thing for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Pizza, man. I'm just sausage pizza, something simple. Give me some cheese dip, maybe for the crust.
Mm-hmm. Having said that, what's like the most disgusting food on the planet that you never want to eat?
Yeah, I'm not a big tomato guy. I'll eat the paste and the ketchup, but just not tomatoes.
And then the last one, what is a cherished family tradition that you hope to either pass on that you've inherited or that you've created that's going into the mix?
My family, every get together we get together and we play old timey like gospel and bluegrass songs together. Like we just kind of get around and sing together and stuff like that. And I love that. And I hope that never dies.
Very cool. Well, thanks again for being on the show with me. Where can people find you?
If you go to jessecoomer.com, so it's JESSECOOMER.com, you can find out all about me there. I'm on Instagram at Jesse Coomer Breath. And you can also find out more about my book if you just Google Language of Breath, and a whole bunch of things are going to pop up. I also do a Breathworker training school called the Language of Breath Breathworker Training School. And you can find out about that at languageofbreathcollective.com, or just Google it. It's up there.
Cool. Thanks so much for being on. And that's it for today.